Our speaker this morning is Sheri-D Wilson, Calgary's current Poet Laureate. She is the award-winning author of 11 books, the creator of 4 short films, and has released 3 albums which combine music and poetry. She is known for her electric performance style, making her a favorite of festivals around the world. She's read, performed, and taught in festivals across Canada, USA, UK, France, Spain, Belgium, Mexico, and South Africa. Her talk today is entitled Living Surrealism. Please help me welcome Sheri-D Wilson.
My talk is about surrealism. So what happened was I was an actor, and I was super young. I know it's hard to believe, but there was a time I was young. And I went to Vancouver, and I got a job actually originally in Victoria in a children's theater called Kaleidoscope. And then I moved to Vancouver, drove in one rainy night to this apartment where it was quite fun and very, as you say, bold. And I got some work as an actor, but in between, I wanted to explore something else, and I didn't know what it was. And I didn't have a name for it. I had seen a little bit of performance art at that time. Most performance art was visual art based. And in fact, to get a grant, you had to be visual art based. And I wanted to do something that was more textual based. And so I moved to Vancouver, and the first thing I did was walk the streets, and I'm walking down the streets, and there's this sort of art gallery called E equals MC squared. And I liked the title of the gallery. And so I got closer, and I really loved the paintings that I saw through the window. So I went inside, met this fellow who's still a very good friend of mine called Lincoln Clarke's, photographer. And I said, who did these paintings? And he was like, this guy named Martin Gadurna. And I was like, Martin Gadurna? Okay. Where does he live? Oh, he lives in Vancouver. And I was like, oh, an artist that lives in the same city. Wow. And he said, I'm going to phone him right now. And I'm like, phone him? Okay. Phoned him, said, hey, there's this young woman who's just amazed by your work. She's ranting and raving. So Martin said, send her over. And so I got on a bus, and I went down Broadway and Alma, where his studio was, and it had to go in this back alley. And I went down this back alley, and this door, there was these stairs, and it was back alley, back of the store. And he opens the door. And I would say, okay, he was handsome. There was that. He was young, he was handsome. I thought he'd be an old guy by the sounds, like he was saying this young woman, da da da. So I thought this guy was gonna be an old guy. He was handsome, he was young. And he was like, hello, you must be Sheri Dale. Because I was Sheri Dale at that time, and I was like, yes. And he said, come in. And he's a surrealist. I'd never met a surrealist. I didn't really know what surrealism was. I was confused by the whole aspect. I just liked his work. And he was like, so, would you like to go to Wreck Beach? I was like, yeah. But I just got into Vancouver. I didn't know what Wreck Beach was, right? So we got to Wreck Beach, and I'm like, okay, I'm from Calgary. People here are naked. And I decided, okay, naked's okay, even though I'm from Calgary. I had to tell you that part of the story, because there I am, moving to Vancouver, finding this surrealist, not having a lot of acting work just landing on my doorstep, deciding that I'm going to put on a performance called Tightwire. So I went to a gallery down in Gastown, and said, hey, I'd like to do this performance. And the woman said, absolutely not, please leave. There was this guy named Todd, and he said, just a second, let's give her a chance. And I was like, give me a chance? I said, oh, you're going to give me a chance. That's so nice of you. And he was like, no, I think you should do this, and we'll see how it goes. So I had a little bit of attitude, a lot of attitude, and I still have a fair amount of attitude. But he said, give her a chance. So I wrote this piece called Tightwire. And I made body masks. At the time I was interested in body masks, and I had gargoyles, and they had different aspects of the head and different body parts which I masked. And they were there. And then I found someone to play the Muslim woman. This was 35 years ago, who was in a hammock between two poles, taught. I played Art, and another friend of mine played Nick. Nick played Norm. And the people that I was staying in their house at the time, their daughter played the audience member. It was sort of like one of those. Put it together and performed it. And had Greg Kramer in the window doing magic, blindfolded. So I had all these surrealist elements that I didn't know was surreal. I had no idea. But after, someone came up to me and they were being quite aggressive, saying, what the hell was that? And they were kind of being aggressive. And I was stepping back because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know, I thought it was, to me it was a play, it was an artful play. But she got quite aggressive and she was coming towards me. And Martin, the surrealist, jumped in front of me and he said, it is surrealism, like this. And I was like, okay, it's surrealism. So I said to her, it's surrealism. Had no idea what that meant. And after this, Martin and the group called the Melmoth Group, they were in Vancouver and associated also in Paris, invited me into the Surrealist group. And I said, sure, because I didn't know what Surrealism was. And I thought, if it's going to protect me from any violence and aggression, I will go with this peaceful Surrealism. And there started a lifelong study, discourse, interest, and passion for me. And so it is surreal because it was a big mistake. And then I wrote, I was very, very, right away, passionate by the idea of how women were treated in Surrealism. That aspect will be mentioned in what I'm going to talk about today. This is a painting that's by Feeney, Leonore Feeney, my favorite surrealist. She's someone I just love her. I was in San Francisco. I go places to write, and I was in San Francisco writing and studying with my teacher, Diane DePrima, down there. And she was telling me, get real, because you're Pollyanna. And I was like, really? And she was like, get real, rah, rah, rah. So I was in my hotel room, and I was trying to get real. And I decided I'll get out a coffee, and I went out, and I usually wear my pajamas when nobody is going to see me. I know. I'm one of those people. But, I'm in San Francisco. Who's going to catch me? And, whatever. So I'm walking along, and I've got my coffee, and I'm like, morning, because I hate morning. I can't talk. Nothing is working yet. walking along, disoriented, and I see a Miro painting. I was like, oh, Miro. So I go inside the gallery, and they have the largest collection of Fini of anywhere in the world. And so I got to see, they took me to the basement. And I was there for about 5 hours. I was still in my pajamas, really kind of ashamed. I couldn't afford any of her pieces. I would love to, but I got to sense them and touch them. And they were like, the women were so amazed by my love for hers. I was weeping as I was looking at these things, that they've offered to give me any of her pieces that they have to, not give it, but allow me to put it on one of my book covers, which I will be doing. Okay, so you know this. Everyone knows this. By Man Ray. It was one of the keys in for me to what surrealism is, because it is what it isn't. So, and it isn't what it is. So you have to look at the polarity of, there is no polarity. And so the dualism is what you acknowledge. It isn't the peace, war, black, white. It's not like that. It's fluid, and it has like that, just like this slide. Okay, so we've finished with that slide. It's the beginning. It's where you, I think, when you get that Man Ray thing, and then you look at the other Man Ray pieces that are questioning reality, questioning what we see, questioning what is our perception, what do we choose to see, how do we choose to see it. All these things are questioned in this piece, and also in all surrealism that follows. Only it gets worse. This is Miro. Miro Catalan. I got to go to his studio in, go there, Mallorca. And his studios there, I went every day for several days just to write and sense his dust, because I absolutely adore Miro as well. And he was a strong Catalan. He'd be very political nowadays. And his studio is magnificent if you get to go there. It's on a cliff, and the way it looks out, and what's inside, and the space that he has created was phenomenal. So we do know that surrealism involves the study of dreams, the study of self-dreams, study of what is a dream, how do we see ourselves in the dream, what is timeless time, what is oniric divination, foretelling, sleep oracles, omens, and reverie. You can think of the hypnagogia, which is between the limbo between wake and sleep, and the transitions between two states of consciousness, thresholds of consciousness, lucid dreaming, hallucinations. Like that limbo would be marked by something like, I have a parrot. He was a free-flying bird, but in the night he would be in his cage. And I would go to bed, and you know when you're just falling to sleep and you're kind of between? He would always, my parrot, Chuchuni, would always go. He knew that state of consciousness. And he did it almost every night. It wasn't just a rare, he was a rare bird. But he was able to sense the reverie, sense the sleep. So somnambulance, sleepwalking, night wandering, the inability to sleep is also very helpful. And so when I started experimenting with surrealism, one of the things that I did was I decided to sleep and dream for 1 week and only drink water. It's like Stephen knew. So I went to bed in a basement, as I was living in a basement at the time. And I had water so that I wouldn't have to leave the room. And I turned off the lights, and I put window shields on, so it was in complete darkness for a week. And I had someone coming to get me, the woman who lived upstairs, Eve, to come and get me after 1 week. And she was like, "What are you doing down there?" And I was like, "Dreaming." "All right, water off the duck's back." And off I went to dream. And I had a notebook beside my bed. But the thing I was going to do, because there's much blindfolding in surrealism, and I'll get to that later, is just make notes, whatever was coming up. So if I get into this lucid space and see what happens. And I ended up writing a piece called Taboo ×2, and it was very long. And it was a salmon suicide note. And I decided in the piece, as I was sleeping and dreaming, that I am the salmon. And that I was getting fished. And I was getting fished by a trawler. So it started involving the environment right away, my pieces. And I was a salmon that needed to spawn. But I come to the mouth of the river, and it's now owned by a multinational corporation who will not let me pass. So I have to have all my eggs come flying out, and they die as I die. Also, a lot of surrealism has to do with death. I'll get to that later. And the study of death. Dreams, death, dying, imagination, they're all very similar. So I wrote that piece in the lucid state, and then I wrote it up, and I met this wonderful woman, Evelyn Roth, who was also doing surrealism and making these inflatables. So I ended up doing this piece with her at fringe festivals. And it was really most interesting. And then I ended up going then after that to Naropa. It's a Buddhist university in Boulder, Colorado, because they had this thing called the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics. And I was very interested on how the beatniks were using surrealism and how they found their roots in Dadaism. And there I met this guy called Allen Ginsberg. And I ended up studying with him. I ended up giving him this salmon piece. And I wrote it when I was asleep. And I didn't even know if I was asleep. Was I asleep? Was I asleep? Was I awake? I don't know. I don't know where I was. I am a salmon. And he was like, "Oh my God. My God. Just really spell correctly. Spell karma correctly, at least." And I was like, "I'm taking a..." Anyway. And the karma would be that I got to study with one of the great minds of our time, embodying a salmon. And it was all because of the salmon, the lucid dreaming, that got me to Alan and got me in the door. Here we go. This guy, Breton. He pisses me off. He's the surrealist that I cannot fathom. I was really, it took me, several hours even to put his slide on my thing, because I'm always mad at Breton. It's my lifelong mad. Because he does things like creates manifestos. And it's against the whole theory of what surrealism is. And Apollinaire ran downstairs in this cafe in Paris when he was like, "Surrealism!" He's the one that named it. Everybody was like, "Oh, it's Breton." It's like, no, it wasn't. It was Apollinaire. But Breton wrote the manifesto. So everybody's like, Breton. I like the idea of Nadya. I'm going to Paris, I find this place, and I'm writing a surrealist play about this old woman who's 101 years old and about all the people she slept with. And because you're 101 and you're allowed to get away with having slept with everyone, and I know you have your values and morals sort of lengthen and widen as you get older. Nadya, you know, he wrote about Nadya. So I ended up with this apartment. I'm having my suitcases. And I was like, where am I going? Where am I going? Turned out that the apartment I was staying in was at the Ile de la Cité, the almond of Paris. Only I was staying right at the clitoris. And I was like, I am living at the clitoris of Paris. Oh. And that's when I realized that I looked across the square. That was the apartment that Breton describes in his book where Nadya lived. I really agree with manifestos because they tell you how to be. And this I find very irritating. And they tell you these are the boundaries in which you have to live and think and be. And I'm not keen on this. Oh, that's surrealism. Oh, that's not surrealism because it doesn't fit into my manifesto. That's surrealism. Oh, you're not a surrealist because you don't fit into my manifesto. Okay, for those of you that are interested in moving on with these ideas, I would recommend writing your own feminine manifesto. And that's what I did. And I got that word from Anne Waldman. She was a little post-beat writer, really amazing woman, amazing writer, poet, friend, teacher. And she started the word feminine manifesto. She is a strong feminist. And she started Naropa University with Alan. She's a real woman. Games. Surrealist, so you have the dreams, and then you have the games. This is another important component. Must try things to strengthen and widen your perception. How you see, how you look inside, how you see the world. These can be found in games. Remember I mentioned Martin Guderna, who started this whole adventure? He's also a chess champion, amazing painter. And he's my brother now. He really is my brother. That's him and I playing chess outside the library because we were doing a surrealist kind of discovery thing. This book is really great if you just want to start playing games. But the games are very important, and also just what you can make up. So I'll be, you know, at Martin's studio when I was quite young. I was like, SheriD. By this time, he was calling me SheriD. He named me because I always used to sign my notes to him Sheri Dale, Sheri-Dale, and then I shortened it to SheriD. And everybody was making fun of me anyway because I was from Calgary, and I was freaky, and I was Sheri-Dale, and they made me into this country and western singer, and I'm like, I'm not a country and western singer. Now I'd be like, I'm cool with that. But at the time I saw that as not cool. And then he said, SheriD. And I was like, SheriD. And so I kind of became SheriD way before hip hop was invented. So Martin, I'm in his studio and he's explaining things to me as he's going along, and I'm writing. I sat in his studio and wrote a lot. He's painting, and he tells me, I can do this from automatism. And I was like, really? And then show me, and he puts on a blindfold. And he was super handsome. I mean, he could play Frisbee, is what I'm saying. He puts a blindfold on, and he goes to the canvas, and he does the entire first drawing of the painting blindfolded. He did it by knowing where the perception of the painting was. And I was like, that's interesting, just on deep levels. Like, wow. And if you think about it, if you really think about it, what could you do with this? Only your third eye. And of course, we all know Magritte. And this is one of his less known pieces. Of course, you recognize the top hat. The woman in my play, my surrealist play, the 101-year-old woman, she was the woman, the unknown woman in the surrealist pictures. The woman in an interesting hat that goes unknown. There's so many identities of women unknown in surrealism that upset me. And so in the play, Letitia Knight was the inventor of the surrealist hat. She was a milliner. And she ironically had her studio on Ile de la City across the street from Nadya's. That was her hat shop in my mind. She invented the bowler. Actually, the bowler was a pig's hat, like a pig farmer's hat. And the reason why, like real, for real, it was a hat that was invented, so it was a real working person's hat. And so for the surrealists to take it, it wasn't a gentlemanly hat as it has become. At the time, it was a pig farmer's hat. And this is the kind of thing that surrealists would love. And maybe Letitia Knight, maybe a woman found that hat and gave it to the surrealists. This also is speaking of the dualism, the duality, and what you see when you step outside of yourself, or when you get yourself out of the way. The curtains. This is another Magritte, and I really like this one because of the mention of what does not exist, what we choose to exist. Exquisite Corpse. Well, I choose to speak it now. The exquisite cadaver, the understanding the transfers of, I'm going to go back. The exquisite corpse is very, very important. And it's certainly important to this talk that we have today because of community. And so an exquisite corpse is when you're playing a game, probably, maybe an exquisite corpse game. But you have many people involved in the creation of one piece. Not a collaboration, because you might not know what the other people are doing. It's an exquisite corpse, which is totally different than a collaboration, although it includes the ideas and the perceptions of all the people that are playing it. So one game that the surrealists used to play was to take a piece of paper and, like you, I don't know you yet, but you're Natalie's friend, I would write one sentence and I would leave one word for you. Open the light to the darkness. And I would leave you with darkness. And then you would go and you would write down.
I'm going to say it?
Yeah.
And let darkness collapse into nothing.
And then you have nothing.
Nothing is the best way to be.
Yeah, so, but you don't really, it's not really an exquisite corpse because we wouldn't know what each other said. And so you can send that paper around to everyone and then open the paper and read the poem. And it's really interesting what the collective mind will create. And it's a great exploration game that the surrealists used to play all the time. So sometimes if you're at a surrealist party, you're eating almonds, there's several exquisite corpses going around. And you're just, the first thing that comes to mind. Now that's the one thing I noticed that the Buddhists, the surrealists, and the beatniks all had in common. And of course, Kerouac named it when he said, first thought, best thought. And I then say equals editing. But the impulse of what you're first writing is the impulse that is without the body, without anything. It's just direct from somewhere. Like the first thing that came to your brain because you were on the spot. That is where your most interesting ideas live, for me. That's my perception. Other people would say other things, but that's what I really strongly believe in. Okay, so you've got the Exquisite Corpse, which is, they have many different definitions. I gave you mine. Automatic behavior from the Greeks, automatos. Self-acting, no judgment, no self-censorship, no mind getting in the way. Just straight. Muse fuse. Automatic writing can be produced in written words. It can be unconscious. It could be spiritual, like John Dee, shortly, like Yeats used to do. All the metaphysicians like Doyle, like the New Revolution. Get it? And you can look this up, automatism. There's so much to it. An artist as a machine. If you, the dreaming thing that I told you about is sort of like that. It was kind of a form of dreaming automatism, or using automatism to dream. Mostly it's for writing, speaking, and some visual art. Woman as muse, of course. The men surrealists all used women. I don't like the word used. Another word for used, women, for their muse. And so you'll notice that a lot of men, painters, writers, wrote about women. They would use them as muse. Interesting, the women surrealists, 89% of which committed suicide, I think because of lack of belonging, sense of belonging, or being accepted in any way. They use themselves as muse, like Frida Kahlo, like Leonardo, like Tanning, like everyone. Just go and look. If you look up Feeney, start there, and then just go female surrealists, and then it will all show you. And they use themselves as subject. There's again Feeney. Interesting, Feeney had about 89 cats living with her over in that apartment in Paris. I know. And all of her pieces, so she used cat as muse, but no one really knows this, only me. This is my theory, is that she painted cat faces on all of her women. And they're all different cats that she had. And then I heard this story when I was in that basement in my pajamas, and this woman tells me, oh yeah, did you hear that story? That she had one art opening and she had to get 2 limos, and everybody was like, you have to get her 2 limos. And she goes into one limo and she had all of her cats put into the other limo, and she brought them to the art opening. And there were cats everywhere. But for her, they were the subjects of her pieces. I love her. Look. That's cat on a dead head. And then women as using themselves as muse, and not always being at all fancy, pretty, or nice. Of being real about what their reflection in the world is. And that's why I love women surrealism and surrealist women. This one is, well, my 2 favorites, Feeney and also Frida. All the famous ones. And not that I would have finished on a male, but this is when I finished at 2 in the morning. This is interesting because of what the mirror is. And so one of the things I was going to suggest that you do is to first look at yourself in the mirror and just study yourself, naked if you can do it. Turn off the lights if you have to. No, naked, preferably, looking at yourself. And then turn your back to the mirror and see yourself as you are.
And so the mirror is what you're actually starting to live. And you can do these experiments. You can do them if you would like. And if you don't, I understand. This is interesting because of that. Because it's an exploration of perception of how he sees himself. He can't see himself. Wow. And not to be reproduced. That's the title. And it's very significant just in leaving you with that thought for the day, and you can go off and think about it, because it's fascinating, isn't it? And then we finish with just some thoughts that I had about what is reality. And a lot of people say, oh, you know, things that happen in life, like the towers coming down, or these things that people say, oh my God, it was so surreal. And we hear that a lot these days. It's not surreal. It's real. And so I suggest going into surrealism and being able to open our perceptions so that we can get real about what is real and call it for what it is, which is it's real. And so the violence in these things that are happening in our world are not surreal. They're definitely real. Thank you.